My name is Rodolfo Gutierrez. I am the Executive Director for ACER, and I am really glad of being here today to present one of our reports, of our research reports. And this time with Rina and Nico, we are going to be telling you about this project, that it was really exciting from the beginning. I just want to start first I'm going to tell you what is ACER. So if we can go to the next slide. So ACER is a nonprofit organization that was created first as a program for clues in 1988, and then transited into a nonprofit organization in 1997. The basic principle of the organization was to create some research with a base of the model of community-based participatory research model, for us to bring communities with us and work with them rather than just bringing the results of some research to them. To that regards, creating some sort of projects along the time. And for that, we've been partnering with several organizations such as the University of Minnesota, Metro State University, McKnight Foundation has been supporting our work. The Minnesota Arts Board has supported our work. And we've been doing a lot of different topics, from healthcare to immigration, economic development, housing, and everything that concerns our communities. This project comes like a new project that was based on a question that came to us from the Minnesota Arts Board through Rina, who was curious what's going on with the Latino community in arts. So back in time, more than a year ago, we were just comparing within ACER about what was going to be the very best way to work on that. And we developed some project. And with that, we invited in a new researcher, the youngest one in the team back in time. Today is another one, but it's still very young, Nicolas, who is also very much embedded and invested in the arts. So he was very interested in participating in this project. Myself, I am arts follower. I have a lot of friends who are members of the arts community, and I am really sad that many of them didn't make it today, because we connect with some of this community that is so wonderful. And since that's pretty much my passion, is because I really wanted to move forward with this project. At the end, I am really glad of the product we do have. So Nico, after we hear Rina, Nico is going to show us what we did. And to that is always it takes a village. So I want to thank my ACER team, because we have very good leadership in there. Carolina de la Rosa Mateo, who is now our Director of Operations. She also helped us in developing so much the methodology and the project. And all the team here, the communications team, is very crucial. So this is an effort that it is well done, because we do have a good team. So I'm going to Rina to say something about the project and why it was interesting and useful for the Minnesota Arts Board.
Is this okay? Switch up.
Up.
Unmute. Okay. Check.
You just need to wait a little bit.
There we go. Okay. Hi, everyone. So my name is Rina. I'm a program officer at the Minnesota State Arts Board. I should a little bit about what Minnesota State Arts Board is. So the Minnesota State Arts Board is a state agency that works to make sure that arts thrive in Minnesota. There's in 2008, those of you who were, here in Minnesota at that time may remember there was a constitutional amendment that was passed by the voters of Minnesota to dedicate a portion of sales tax to a lot of different things, including clean water, parks and trails, wildlife, and one of those things was the arts. The Arts Board's been around since before that, but that amendment did mean that we have dedicated dollars coming from sales tax. Whenever you spend money, a little teeny bit of it goes into this fund, and that fund can be used for the arts, among other things. So we administer grant programs both for individual artists, for arts organizations, for organizations that are not arts organizations that are doing arts programming. And it's kind of like often a yearly cycle. So every year there's new grant opportunities, and people can apply for funding and do arts stuff with it. My job is to support applicants with the application process. It's also to support grantees. If you have a grant, make sure everything, you have any questions or someone to answer them. And I also run the panel process. All of our decisions are made by citizens. So like groups of like 8 people, 10 people come together, read all the applications, score them, and that's how they get funded. The other piece of my job, a small portion of it, is to do these federal initiatives funded through the National Endowment of the Arts to increase infrastructure for folk and traditional arts. And that's actually, that it was part of one of those federal initiatives in which we were working with ASER. But early on, talking with, I think I was just talking probably with Rodolfo at that point. Nico came on a little later. We decided that it would be good to not draw hard lines between contemporary arts and traditional arts, because a lot of people tend to mix those two in their practice. So just kind of think of it more broadly and we approach this work. So I'm hopeful that, it's been fantastic to have this report. I'm really grateful to ASER, to Rodolfo and Nico for doing this, and to everyone for participating. And I'm hopeful that it will be useful, not just to the Arts Board, but also to arts organizations, other funders in the state of Minnesota, artists themselves, to make sure that Latina creativity can thrive in the state of Minnesota. And I'll pass it to Nico.
Thank you.
Beautiful. I've got
That's
my
right.
own.
Okay, I'll just.
So I'm gonna move over there to to Nico.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it. I appreciate the introduction. My name is Nicolas Diaz de Leon, and I'm a research associate with ASER. I've been for about 1.5 years now. And the Latine Artists of Minnesota project is one that I started pretty much around the same time that I started working with ASER. So I feel like in a lot of ways I grew alongside this project. I learned about ASER's mission through this project, and through collaborating with the Arts Board, learned what the arts portion is. And we combined these goals with the proposal that we had, what the project that we were looking for, and we constructed the Latino Artists of Minnesota project. This is our final report presentation. So what I wanted to walk through with you guys today is get a little bit into give you a bit of a look into what our initial goals were, what we were setting out to do with this project, what kind of participants we wanted to reach with our questions, before really getting into our methodologies and our research approaches. So I wanted to give you guys a bit of a view into this. And then following that, I want to get a little bit into the weeds of what our methodology was. And not only this, but what it resulted in. So how many participants we had, demographic makeup, things of this nature, then the things that we got out of our findings, and then bring it back into a big picture, the recommendations that we have to arts funding bodies, the motivations of Latino artists, the goals that Latinos artists have here in the state today, etc. Wonderful. So just as a brief introduction, Rodolfo Gutierrez, Executive Director, helped with this project. The former Associate Director, Monica Cruz, was also instrumental in this project. Myself as project lead, Nicolas Diaz de Leon. But again, it takes a village. Many people are involved. Wonderful. So just to begin with the project background, Latino Artists of Minnesota project was a project meant to increase Latina creativity in Minnesota by identifying these 3 main things. And this was just clear throughout the entire project. It was, what are the barriers affecting Latina artists today? What are the goals of Latina artists in all of their diversity? As it's not monolithic, it's extremely diverse. And the motivations of these artists. More specifically, the goal of this project was to assess the major difficulties Latina communities have to overcome and to inform about how to facilitate access to resources and support that could incentivize their creative work. After some background research and topic, which is something that we like to do at HACER to really understand the context that this work is being brought into the research realm, the impetus for this project really comes from many places, and one of them is from previous research on social and institutional barriers that prevent Latina artists from being allowed to engage with arts in inclusive and sustainable ways. This is an extremely broad overview, but there is a lot of research that's in very tangible and specific ways. For this project, it was funded by the Minnesota State Arts Board, and we wanted to obtain the information that we were looking to receive and to address the goals that we had set out from the very beginning through the following methodologies. So we wanted to host 3 focus groups throughout the course of a year and have 10 in-depth interviews of around an hour and an hour and a half. That's one-on-one conversation with participants, with artists inquiring about their experiences. I'll go into this in a second, but that's not quite written here because it's a little bit different. But as a part of this project, we also had a steering committee, an advisory board, essentially this project. This consisted of, I believe, 9 or 10 participants of people who have dedicated themselves to the arts in one way or another in Minnesota, all being of Latino origins. This includes academics, people who are established within artistic communities, community leaders, and et cetera. And to us, they were our North Star in a lot of ways. We're the research organization and we have these questions, but they are people who have spent their careers thinking about the things that we're asking. And they're also people who bring diversity and breadth into what is the Latina experience. We want people to, we wanted everyone to bring in their experience. So it's not just where in Latin America is your heritage, what kind of art do you do, but it's also geographical diversity. We had steering committee participants that lived in Fargo, that lived in other places outside of the Twin Cities. At the beginning, we discussed thoroughly what does the word artists mean. This is something that was also a part of our questionings in the focus group and in-depth interview. Finally, what we decided was most important to us was 1, anyone engaged in the process of creative production, and 2, that you self-identified with the term artist. Not if you don't identify as artist, it doesn't mean that you weren't able to participate in the project, but that was an important question that we developed. If you identify with us an artist, that is enough for us to include one in the project and to make sure that your voice is heard. Here are some examples. A brief timeline, the project started in earnest at the end of September. We had various goals for making sure that we hosted our focus groups in a timely manner, our in-depth interviews in a timely manner. You'll see here that the focus groups preceded the in-depth interview. In part, this was because we actually used the focus groups. Focus groups be group conversations with over 5 people, about 6 to 10 people. We wanted the information from those conversations to be used to hone the questions that we use for the in-depth interviews, to know what is on the mind of artists, what are topics that we want to know more deeply that we can get in a one-on-one conversation versus a focus group. That is why it precedes it. Throughout the entirety of the project, we met with our steering committee. We informed them of our progress, our findings, and they advised us throughout the whole thing. And many times that meant going in one direction, having our meeting, and then going into another, having different considerations. And they were instrumental in making sure that our final report ended up the way that it did. This is quickly, I don't want to spend much time here, but I wanted to just give you guys a brief idea of what the proposal looked like and what the Arts Board and HACER initially set out to find. Of course, things take their own forms as they become actualized, but this was always the foundation of the project. These are the project deliverables, which mean that this is what we were committed and interested to finding through our research. I've spoken in a more broad way as to what these are. I'll leave this up for a second so that you may read it if you want. So to begin, this was something that we gave to our steering. We wanted to outline what are the goals of our focus group. So this is the first project where we're trying to understand, we're gathering the first bit of information and making our first contact with Latine artists in Minnesota. So we wanted to motivators, drivers, and goals for Latine artists, determine the barriers. And then importantly are these last two, to hear the voices of these artists insofar as how they would address these barriers with potential solutions. It is often the people who are facing hardships that know how to best overcome these hardships. So it's important that we wanted to listen to them and give them the space to answer those questions themselves and to highlight important topics and themes present amongst Latino artists to then inform the in-depth interview protocol. So to begin, to get into the weeds, but to get an idea of how it is that we reached the conclusions that we did, because it was through much time, hard work, and a lot of contributions from many, many, many artists. So the focus group demographic information, we had 19 participants in all hosted throughout the focus groups. The average age group was between 25 and 34. Identified as female, many identified as male, some identified as non-binary. As far as race and ethnicity goes, obviously this is a question that is not so clear and simple for people of Latine heritage and origin. Race is certainly a fact. People don't always conceptualize it this way themselves. For many view their race as being their ethnicity. And that's great and fine. So 9 self-identified as having lineage from communities in Mexico, and the remaining 10 participants had lineages from a variety of places, Ecuador, Colombia, Venezuela, many, many more. 10 participants lived out of St. Paul, Minneapolis, while the remaining 9 lived either in St. Paul or Minneapolis. And this was really important for us, and also a barrier for the project to get participants that live outside of the cities. And both of these things were true for the same reason, which is that arts funding and artistic communities are easier to find in denser populations, when there are more people closer together, when there are more people who are interacting with each other, just in one city, in one similar geographic space. As things become more disparate, funding becomes more disparate, and then also communities become more disparate. And once you're talking about the population that we're talking about, obviously Latino people in Minnesota, it becomes harder and harder to find people of your community, of your interests, in smaller towns and places that are less densely populated. So for this exact reason, that's a population, and this isn't to say though that there's any fewer artists necessary in these less densely populated places, relatively speaking. And it's for this reason that we really wanted to hear their voices, to know how we can best support them, to hear what their goals are, what their patients are, etc. These are the themes that we uncovered. So this is after listening to the focus groups again, after creating popular themes throughout each interview or throughout each focus group, grouping them together all into one. This is in the final report we presented as what we found from our conversations in big groups for focus groups. 1, for inspirations and motivations, many said that they wanted to represent or connect with Latina upbringing and ancestral roots, that this was something integral to their artistic practice. To express the importance of social and political justice through storytelling or activism. I think that's most perfectly represented here in this print by Ricardo Levens Morales, who's a printmaker and a painter here in Minneapolis, who's just super dedicated to grassroots political revolutionary movement. And he's continued that throughout his whole life. Others stated that education, mental health struggles, self-exploration, and more served as their primary motivators. As far as access to resources for artistic practice goes, the vast majority identified a lack of knowledge or absence of spaces that encouraged creativity. This was a theme throughout the entirety of the project, and a theme in not only groups and interviews, but independent conversations that I had with artists. There are a lot of resources in the Twin Cities for the funding of the arts, slightly less outside of this, but it's really important. Those resources are only useful if people know about them, and a lot of people didn't know about them. And a lot of people also expressed the lack of feeling community in their creativity. And that was represented in the absence of spaces that encouraged creativity. Many participants stated that they felt like they were an island and not having a ton of people that they could come together with in a consistent way. It was important for artists to find support from other Latina artists. As I was saying before, spaces not intentionally made for Latina artists were more difficult for them to feel comfortable in or to gain access to. The funding opportunities felt either unknown or inaccessible to them. Challenges as artists, most artists experienced at some point or in the moment, either systemic or interpersonal racism and discrimination. That is something that seeps into their experience, not only as a Latina person, but as an artist. Some felt as if they were viewed as immigrants rather than artists. The potential that they had was limited by the discrimination that they faced. In general, the support of the idea that these artists had to work harder than their white American counterparts to achieve the same successes and to receive the same funding opportunities. Here's some quotes. I'm going to read two and then leave the other one for you to read. I'll read the top one first. Artistically, the challenges have been my own voice. How can I distinguish myself and what do I say versus what people may want to see? I think this is something that everyone experiences. Lately, I just realized that there is financial assistance for artists. I didn't even know that. As Latinas, we don't even have knowledge that this exists, so we do not pursue them. And I'm going to read the last one now. I think there's an incredible amount of resources in Minnesota, but I think Latina communities, artists, have a hard time being chosen for these awards. I would like to know why. Are people applying? What are people applying for? From this, we use this information to create and construct our in-depth interview protocol. So these were conversations that we had with people. The focus groups were conversations that we had with people as a group. And now in our interviews, this is one-on-one hour to hour and a half long conversations where we're really able to get very much so more deep into the topics and the themes that were presented in the focus group. That was the goal that we sent out with. We had a total of 10 participants, averaging in ages 30 to 39, 4 self-identified as female, 6 as male, 5 identified as from communities or indigenous cultures in Mexico, others identified more diversely, Puerto Rican, Venezuelan, Salvadorian, and more. Only 1 participant this time lived outside of St. Paul and Minneapolis, while the remaining 9 lived in either St. Paul or Minneapolis. This is something that we actually realized was a limitation of this research, that we didn't have as many voices as we wanted to for people living outside of the Twin Cities. As I was saying, the importance of this is paramount, and it was difficult for us to conduct outreach in these places to get people involved. After the focus groups, a lot of our initial contacts and outreach efforts put us in contact with the people that participated in our focus groups. But by the time that in-depth interviews came, we had utilized all of the people that we could reached out to, and it was just far, far, far more difficult. Themes that we uncovered in the in-depth interview, they differed a little bit, and they were similar in some ways. As far as Latinidad and artistic practice goes, most self-identified as artists, which points to the question that we were asking, how do you feel about the term artists? Most self-identified as artists and viewed art as integral to all aspects of life, not just the things that they create, not just the product of their practice. While most identified as artists, many also identified as feeling a complicated relationship with this term, just in the sense of who is allowed to practice art is a big question that people receive from their society, not so much ones that they're able to answer themselves. Oftentimes, art is viewed in the realm of higher art, within galleries, within museums, and that is not always accessible to artists that are not from this country, that do not speak English as the first language, that did not inherit the American culture, people that are Latina. People were motivated to tell stories of culture and life through art, and the importance, it felt important for these people to process and retaliate against oppression through their artwork. As far as barriers to artistic practice goes, Many felt that there was communicational barriers that made both applying to funding and educational opportunities difficult. So this is again pointing to that it's not necessarily a lack of funding or a lack of educational opportunities, it's the accessibility to which people feel like they may apply for these opportunities. So not having English as a first language was one of the barriers. Some people felt isolated throughout as a result of their cultures and backgrounds. They felt underrepresented in the artistic spaces that do exist. Again, it's not that there's a lack of artistic spaces in Minneapolis or St. Paul, or even the state of Minnesota necessarily. There's many and they're bountiful, but that Latine artists specifically did not always find the space that they wanted or needed. People really pointed often to the difficulty of maintaining one's livelihood financially while practicing their artwork. This is for the people that were making art full-time, which was the minority of people, because a lot don't even have the opportunity or privilege to even breach that, that boundary, meaning that a lot of people did art as a pastime. We've spoke to participants that work 60 hours a week at their jobs, and then they spend their entire weekends of free times. In the case of one participant, taking videos or photographs at weddings, doing things like this. So it's something that's done in their pastime, though, and it's different. In the in-depth interviews, we were able to speak to participants, though, that had felt were able to access funding resources at different points throughout their career, that they did apply to the grants that are available within Minneapolis and St. Paul, the funding, the educational opportunities, the artistic spaces, and that they were able to be supported in these ways at some point. What this points to, I think, is sort of the temporal aspect of funding and support and community, that you can receive something once. It requires consistent care, practice, and attention to live a life as an artist. And grants are locked into a period that one receives them. As far as in-depth interview quotes go, again, I'm only going to read two. You can read the others. The way that I understood art and culture was something that was not separate from daily life, from public life. Like art and culture were infused in everything from health to education to just, you know, your way of being a human in the world. And now I'm going to read the third one from the bottom. I've always drawn what's important to me. When I was 4, that was chickens. When I was 8, it was pirates. And now it's resilience in the face of oppression. There was never a transitory moment where I said, I'm going to do political art. So we spent some time with this information. People spent a lot of their free time with us, and they dedicated a lot of their resources. A lot of our steering committee participants, and a lot of the artists that participated in this project not only gave us their time, but they also gave us their connections, recommending other artists to participate in this project. So we wanted to make sure that we spent a lot of time sitting with this, contemplating it and processing it. In the final report, what it culminated in one way, because this is only one aspect of the project, we were also hoping to uncover the goals and motivations, which we were able to do, is recommendations to anyone who can use these recommendations. It's not just the Minnesota State Arts Board, as Rina said, it's any funding bodies that are committed or interested in supporting Latine artists, Latine community members in their efforts. Participants from both the focus groups and sessions and the in-depth interviews provided several solutions and recommendations. These solutions were for funding bodies to intentionally support communities of Latine artists or host events that bring Latine artists together. One form that this may take is grants that are specific to artists for these, that are specifically targeted towards these communities. Grants that, because they're specifically targeted toward these communities, do not have language barriers, so that they can be applied to in Spanish, or written barriers that they can be applied to via video or through portfolios. People spoke to wanting less rigorous application and selection processes for Latine artists, to include those without documentation, English as a first language, and informal arts education. In a lot of ways, these three things are the reality of Latine artists in the state of Minnesota today. So if you want to reach these communities, this is something that you must contend with, of, are you going to be able to offer this to people? If you want to reach Latine communities, you must. People were to receive more feedback for rejections as a way of learning about the granting process. They wanted more intentional outreach of resources to Latina artists of all background and less restrictive funding opportunities that allow for artists to maintain their livelihood while practicing their art. Once again, I wanted to thank the Minnesota State Arts Board for funding this. This wouldn't have been possible without their dedication and interest in this topic and Latina communities. And I'm really grateful to Rodolfo Ser, the participating artist in our steering committee.
Thank you, Nicolas. So as you can see, there is really a need to know more about Latino artists in Minnesota and how to support them. So I also want to reiterate our thanks to the Arts Board. Rina Rossi here with us as it was crucial, because if she shouldn't knock the door and ask us, how can we help? This couldn't be possible. And now I can tell you, we know much more, because we were so lucky that a lot of artists were joining this project to tell us what they were thinking about this and how they could think on changing stuff. And we had in our group very well-renowned artists like Luis Fitch, who is now a national hero, to other ones who were just starting, like our dearest friend, who is painting for the first time and in more open way. She is an artist. She's been working on herself, but now she's even has her art gallery now open. So that also brings us to a new knowledge about how diverse the artist group in the Minnesota Latino communities, because we saw from a videographer. I really love that story. That videographer who is now working in weddings and quinceañera parties, but saying he's doing something different. He's bringing his camera and making different angles and different kind of style, because he believes in his art, and he is putting that up front and saying, I do art, and this is my art. And he participated very passionately in the focus groups. And also our advisory committee was so stellar. It was composed by academic people who are working on art history, but also by artists. So that said is bless you. That said is something that we started, and I hope we can continue moving forward with the help of the Arts Board, but also with other organizations that can join us to move forward and say, these are the spaces, these are the opportunities, and we can keep on going, because that art is very valuable. And also one thing that calls my attention is many of the artists are finding that their audience is not Latinos. They are more like other audiences, more commonly white consumers of art and all that. Those who are buying the paintings from, you name it, Gustavo, Lira, or whomever, are not Latinos. So there is that disconnection between the creator and the community. So we need to really work together to bring joy together. And now let's open for questions. And yeah, there. You need to be patient. It's like
Okay.
taking a little bit.
Okay. Hello?
Yeah.
Okay. I have 3 questions. One is minor, but would be nice to have how many were English speakers or recent immigrants, because that came a lot of times in your narrative. So that would, if you have that information, that would be very useful, more than other little things that are there. The other ones, when you came recommendations, it came to my mind something that just happened to me. I'm in a society, and we're getting the abstracts done. And for the first time, they have an equity and diversity team, and they asked us if we could help a new researcher or a immigrant, or to put their work, if someone could help them. So like another eyes before submitting. So I'm thinking this exactly the same thing. I mean, if there could be someone who's very well experienced and could work with the person to do the submission, do the application, that would be like a huge difference. So might not have come from, you came from almost what you were saying. And the last one, I love of the pictures, and where can I get them? Where can I look for them?
Yeah. I'll ask Rina first if you can address a little bit of what is going to do the art sport with this information and look to support our artists.
Yeah, well, actually, I'm just standing over here so I can look at everybody. Thank you, because I got that one thing I was going to say that I forgot to say is that we are not, this kind of ranges across many communities, but I think a lot of people feel like it's scary to contact staff at a state agency, like I can't possibly email you or call you. Please email us, call us. It is our job to support people in navigating what can be a complicated process of applying for a state grant. So because of the fact that we do our decision-making through citizen panels, that means that I myself am not the one who's going to score a grant, I'm not the one who's going to, review it. So that means I can help be a second set of eyes on that application. We often are, as program officers, the people who look over a draft and say, oh, I'd recommend this part doesn't seem that clear. You should talk more about that. Because it can be, it's a hard process, and much as the process, will probably continue to change, hope become simpler, but on a shorter term, just call us and, we're there to, so those of you in the room here, if you are artists, be in touch. If you're not, and people who are, just encourage them. It's not scary. It's totally okay to reach out to us. So in one of the bullet points there was around gatherings. And that is, let's see, is it the first one?
The second one? No, and the next one. There. There, no. No.
Wait,
no.
I can't remember.
No. One of the, almost the last. That on the recommendations, more.
Okay, yeah. Let's see. Yeah, okay, the second one.
Mhm.
So some things are things that we can change on a short-term basis. Some things are things we can change on a long-term basis. Some things are things that there may be a lot of barriers to us being able to change them, being a state body. But this, in terms of short term, I think that the idea of gatherings and events, knowledge share, thing that can be achieved on a short term basis, and so that's something that we're interested in finding partners to work on that with us, because I don't think we're the right convener, but I think we can work with people who would be the convener of that to make things like that happen. And then in terms of some of the, direct things we can work on about application processes, those are all things we have been and will continue to keep working on. The reason I say I hope this will be useful beyond just the arts, because there's also a lot of foundations in Minnesota that have a little more flexibility than we sometimes do to make changes a little more quickly. So potentially, some of these suggestions may be useful in that environment as
I just wanted to ask about your citizen panel. How diverse are they? And do they have the dimension of culture that we need to have in recognition of the work that is being done? So what does it look like? Yeah.
So we have an amazing staff person who is the one who works on recruiting the panels, and the goal is always to have each panel be representative of the demographics of Minnesota. Of course, it's a time commitment. We do have a stipend for people who serve, but it does, to be 1 day. It's a 1 day meeting, and that can be a barrier sometimes to be able to take off an entire day and attend a meeting. So I would say there's a fair amount of diversity on the panels, but some of those elements of needing of time, needing to be, able to do that, make it difficult for it always to be. It also has depended on the program. So I used to we had a folk and traditional arts program. And so for that program, we very intentionally recruited people who had, as much as possible, had knowledge in the cultural backgrounds that were applying to the program. 40 different applicants might have 40 different cultural backgrounds. So it wasn't possible to have always every single one represented, but we made an effort in that way. We are always looking for more people to serve. So if you have recommendations, if you're able, please come serve with us. We need people to do it. It's also a great opportunity. If you're thinking of writing a grant, the Arts Board, be a panelist first, because then you can see what it's like on the back end and read a bunch of grants and see oh, I see that didn't work out very well. That was a strong way to do that. And then write your own.
How many people are on the panel?
So it's around 8 to 10 per team, but we have many, many teams serve in a year.
Is it all published in terms of what your meeting dates are? and all
Yep.
that?
Yep, it's all on our website. You can, and actually that's another thing. I mean, you can listen in anytime you want. You can listen in to this. Yeah.
Thank you, Sandy. Any other questions, or do we have questions? All right.
Language barriers, and it's curious to know what's different and what's unique if the artists have English as a barrier versus the Latino artists that are more affluent in English or American born, so they're completely they might not even speak Spanish. So if there is anything that is particularly different or remarkable that was depending on the language.
Cool.
Hello. It's a good question. This kind of speaks to your question as well, the differences and that it's important to know the age of immigration, etc. Background. I won't say, I have trouble answering it mainly because the information that we gathered for participants wasn't necessarily kept in line with what their level of language speaking is. So as far as data that we've gotten from, it's hard for me to say, but from things that I can bring to my mind right now, just as the person who had these conversations, it's as clear as a distinction as one could imagine. It is essentially, it's not just language barriers as representative of something which is being new to a country, being new to a culture, being new to a system, being new to communities. Language barriers is one of the symptoms of this massive change, which is immigration. So one who immigrated more recently, or one who has more trouble speaking English, also has trouble or knows a little bit less about the structures and the systems that are put in place. For example, the idea that there are public funds as a part of our structural funding systems is crazy. People come from countries where it's that doesn't happen. That's why I didn't know there was funding, because why would I take a handout? Practice my art is how a lot of people viewed it. So yeah, to answer your question, I think people who had English as a second language, or who were learning English, or who did not speak English at all, oftentimes, maybe either as causation or correlation, have hard times accessing resources, knowing about resources, etc. Yeah.
Anybody else?
We have a question from Facebook. What were the artistic areas you learned where Latinos are working in? Is there any in which you could say the majority of participants prefer, music, painting, etc.?
It's a great question.
Yeah.
I mean, this speaks to two things. So it speaks to, in some ways, we set out to investigate folk and traditional arts. But as Rina introduced at the beginning, that's something we also kind of moved away from, as we didn't want to be the adjudicators of what is folk and traditional as contemporary art. So in this, that in one part it discusses that. In the other part, I'll answer this more quickly. No. Yeah, no. People do what it is that to do, I think, regardless of their culture. I'm certain that, uniquely, cultures to have more traditional artists, such as, mariachi bands, or people making like papel picado, or people like Luis Fitch doing like calaveras, Dia de los Muertos things. So the content might change, and as we saw, the culture affects content. Medium which that takes, we did not find any heavy doing towards one.
And to that point, I guess something that really caught my attention is that the diversity of activities and say areas of working from the artists who participated in the studies wide. I imagine that we were going to find someone who does some voices for cartoons and things like that, and to a queer person who does in the queer bars and all that. So they are very proud of their art, but it's like, yeah, it's not only mariachi, it's not only singers or dancers like we might think, but it's a wide variety of expressions. Even people were working from Nicaragua who were adding themselves to our focus groups, and they were sending their art to here to Minnesota. So it was really beautiful. It's wide variety of activity. Yep. Mario.
So I'm curious to hear a little bit more about the intended audiences or markets for some of the art. I heard a little bit touched upon, but looking at the presentation, a lot of emphasis on funding that helps in the production of it. I'm curious on the consumption side.
Oh, that's also a very good question. Well, we responded to our request on learning more on how to support this community, but certainly ACER has always the intention of being some product that benefits so many people. So we want to develop from here some sort of strategy to engage with the consumers, with all the people who might need, not know about that. Not only myself, with Sandy, I am participating in a project to create this Latino museum or center for arts, in the sense that we learned something from this project and we want to put something in practice. And I am really glad to be part of this group. And I am going to ask Sandy later to talk about this, but I don't know if you want to add something about that. Nope. 2 no's in a row. I don't. Hey.
So my question is, so you talked a little bit about how some of the artists expressed how, their Latinidad was an important part of their art, and, is shown in their art, in other ways not. But did anything come up about actually maybe not wanting to put into that hole of a Latin artist, and maybe wanted to in some way separate their identity from their art and not be, put into that box? Did that come up at all?
That's such a good question. Yes, absolutely. This is actually one of the questions that we asked. So not only do you identify with the term as artists, there's also something that we're mindful of, is that, yes, it'd be great if there were funding opportunities, if there are spaces specifically Latina artists, but there's always this double-edged sword that it is, do I have to then as a Latino be Latino art? What does that mean? Does it then have to be papel picado or calaveras, or does it have to be like a representation of my culture? Can I not just be an artist outside of culture? What I'm saying right now is feedback that we got. So they're not questions that we had while creating this in our in-depth interview protocol, but it's also feedback we got from people. So not everybody. Some people are really content and happy to be viewed as Latina art, and that their work is of Latina origins, because that is their intention. That is what they want. In the cases of other artists, they occasionally felt like they had felt this pressure an immense pressure to create what people expected them to create, whether that be because of a specific ask for someone say, we want you to do something like this, to participate in this gallery, want you to have this kind of art, or amorphous force, which is a society or culture telling you are Latino, this is the kind of art we allow you to create, our expectations of you as an artist. So yeah, it varied, absolutely. But people did expect grievances. I think the thing that came out of it most clearly was just that people had control over how they were received, that they weren't being projected on by people outside of themselves, that they were giving the full liberty and free to express themselves where they want, and that they weren't put in boxes unbeknownst to them or unwillingly.
And perhaps to add to that, also one of the outs that we did have is that many people were identifying themselves as part of a group. After they met each other, they were asking for contact information from each other. Say, can I follow up with? Please send me the email if that's okay. And then even today, there are some of them meeting apart from this exercise to create that sense of how we can progress better. And also our work is being amplified thanks to the art sport, because we've been talking about the possibility of expanding more the research or how to disseminate more of these. But also we've been receiving some calls of Latino artists who want to say, yeah, I think we need to talk more about Latinos from the Latino perspective. Any other question? If not, I really want to say thank you. Thank you so much to the Arts Board.
You guys.
And thank you, Nico, for the spectacular work. And I want to miss him. He's leaving as there. Yeah. I
It's
hate
been a
him
pleasure.
because of that.
Yeah,
But he's pursuing further dreams, bigger dreams. So, and I want to thank the Wilder Center and the Wilder Foundation for bringing us to this space again. It's really wonderful. I really like it. If you didn't notice, we do have different cameras. So you were appearing in the Facebook and sometimes without you being knowing. But yeah. So thank you everyone for being here, and thank you to all those who were following us in the Facebook Live. At a given moment, I saw like 10 people connected. That is really encouraging. And the food, if you want to take some, and please, and yes,